that is not the start of this discussion. You know, this discussion started, I think, 20 years ago, when independently different nations like the States and Switzerland had one, then the Germans, I don't recall the French, the British had. So, and now they all sit together and they have to basically come up with an international standard, and they failed for 20 years. Because every single institution was driven by a guy who was very idealistic, but they all thought they were in the possession of the truth. And so they could not imagine to swerve only just one notch from what they had just established, you know? And this is the reason why it would just never come together. The Germans and the Americans were just butting their heads for 20 years, and they would just try to win the others over. The Australians went with America, most of the English countries went this way, and you also need to know that the American testing is basically a manufacturer's organization, you know. The way the Americans set this up is there would be test rigs, and you would measure against a certain standard, and then you would not need an institution that would measure for you. You do this wherever you find a rig, and then you seal a package and you give it away to the federation. And as long as there is no accident, nobody will open that package. And when there is an accident, they will look into that package and see if your documentation is all right. That has the big advantage that if you do it solidly, there's hardly any costs involved, you know. In Germany, every single test is 5,000 euros in the glider, you know. So you could say, well, yeah, the manufacturers should have that money, but they instantly hand these costs over to you. So in the end, it's you paying for that, you know. And so there was a big disagreement between those testing institutions, and of course the Germans would say the Swiss test is no good, the Americans would say, yeah, but the German test is no good, and the British test is no good, and they all no good. And they were sitting together on tables forever, and they just couldn't come to an agreement. And then the Germans figured if they go through the CIVL and make the CIVL use their limitations, their certification limits for world standard, they would win, you know. And it looked like they would go for it because the Americans would actually decline a little bit in their federation, and the British were not pushing hard. But in the last meeting, it didn't come, and the reason probably was that the Germans had done 2 German nationals and basically proven themselves that it is unusable, you know, to disqualify people based on angle measurements that are so sensitive, and also in their tolerance just so hard to pin down so accurately. They tried one, they gave a 0 to all the guys that didn't comply, and then 2 days later they gave the points back because they were threatened to go home, and it was a big mess. Next year they did the same thing, it was a bigger mess. And so, and after that, learning after that, we realized we can't do this at the Europeans because we're just losing too many pilots, you know. And so I was really happy that we came to measure, but based on a trust basis. Like you would be a pilot and you would say, come on, measure my glider, I want to know. That is a lot better than when the CAO comes and says, we're going to measure your glider now, and you know they're going to measure your glider, and you have already your little tricks, you know, the restrainer is back on, it's even shorter than it was before, you know, and you have that little excenter that you swing around, and now your dive sticks are higher, you know, before takeoff you swing it back and now they're low again. So we haven't seen the end of that. We would probably have to make the rule to see how creative people are on cheating. And honestly, I say, if we started like that, you're going to lose because I'm going to win. I am the source of cheating. You know, I can make sales. You cannot see the difference. You know, you cannot see the difference, and they're going to, on high dive sticks, are going to pass people at 120, and they would just sit in trucks, and they cannot imagine how it's possible. It is possible, you know. And so I'm happy we are not moving this direction, because it would just change the game. Instead of flying competition, it would be like a cheating competition, you know. Basically the smartest designer or the smartest person with aerodynamic knowledge about all that comes out the best. So I think we all realized we don't want to do that, and I also think that except for that accident, the Europeans were a success in the way that for the first time people would get an idea what the experts are talking about. You know, when you go away from here, just remember a few things. Those numbers that I said, you're probably going to remember. Don't take them too literal. If you measure your gliders and you do not have 5.5 inboard and 7.5 outboard, don't be worried. You know, I would be worried if you were below 4 degrees on the inboard and below 4 degrees or 5 degrees on the outboard. You know? So you need to see not in decimals of degrees, but in degrees. How much is a degree on dive sticks? Usually with a thread of those dive sticks, a full turn is about a degree. That's what we have. And the last 5 years have basically done one thing to the topless hang gliding. It has brought the limits of the really high German limit and what we use here in the comps closer and closer together. You know? So my glider is basically a full turn away from certification. And believe me, when we started out with the topless gliders, I was still with Icaro, with Manfred, and we had to come, I think it was like 4 or 6 turns between certification and usable comp winning setup. And the reason for that must be that the dive sticks are stiffer now. You know, you set them low because you know when they get on the load they're gonna stay. In the early days we had, especially the inboard dive stick was not very powerful. It would be like a bar that goes over the crossbar, and it would sort of under load bend the leading edge upwards where the leading edge is not very strong, and that basically was a useless construction. You know, it was just the beginning. And then Steve Pearson, Will Swing, he came up with that compression dive stick system with the cables, and that was a big jump forward. All of a sudden you could see you can actually, if you have the glider flipped over, you can flip the glider back on one dive stick, either the inboard or the outboard. You try this in the first generation and you just break the glider, you know, or break the dive stick, you know. So the dive sticks are strong enough now. Now it's up to us to use them. You know, they're useless as strong as they are if we are so low and if we keep them floating in the sail. You know,